Welcome back to this special Free Speech Nation when we're looking into the WPATH files, leaked internal messages from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Now, the current version of WPATH Standards of Care is version 8, readily available online. There is a new chapter on eunuchs, in which eunuch is proffered as a legitimate gender identity that requires surgical realisation. This is how WPATH defines eunuch in the current guidelines. Eunuch individuals are those assigned male at birth and wish to eliminate masculine physical features, masculine genitals or genital functioning. And this is what WPATH concludes in its statements of recommendations. We recommend healthcare professionals and other users of the Standards of Care 8th guidelines should apply the recommendations in ways that meet the needs of eunuch individuals. Now, in 2022, The Telegraph reported that NHS Scotland had uploaded a draft version of WPATH Standards of Care that contained this chapter on eunuchs to the official NHS website. But there's a further sinister element to this story that was uncovered by Genevieve Gluck for the Redux website, and I spoke to Genevieve earlier today, and this is how that discussion went. Genevieve Gluck, thank you very much for joining me on Free Speech Nation.
Thank you for having me.
In the summer of 2022, NHS Scotland uploaded to their official website the WPATH Standards of Care version 8, or at least a draft version of those standards of care, in which there was a new chapter about eunuch identities, and specifically there was a link to a fetish site relating to the notion of the castration of minors, and which also featured graphic depictions, written depictions of the sexual abuse of minors. You were the first to break this story at Redux magazine. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the Eunuch Archive was the website that was named in the draft Standards of Care 8 document under a chapter called Eunuch Gender Identity. And that website has on its main site a link to a fiction archive where there are thousands of stories written about graphic castration, explicit sexual castration, even of children, a total of about 10,000 stories altogether. And of that total, nearly 40% or nearly 4,000 of those stories are tagged specifically with the term minor, meaning that they deal with themes of children. Some of these stories included themes of doctors halting the puberty of children to then sexually abuse them. Some of the stories involved forcible surgical castration of children, primarily boys. In fact, these stories were some of the most popular on the website, and others include depictions of chemical castration, there being an overlap with the drugs that are given to children that are called puberty blockers. This website was started in 1998, but had previously been hosted on a body modification fetish website called BME. So it has been running for several decades now, and men who are anonymized are allowed to produce these stories that are shared on that website.
So, Genevieve, I'm sure that if we had a representative of WPATH here, and we've tried our best to get one, they would say, but we did not link to those kinds of stories that you are describing, that's a separate website that you would have to go through the Eunuch Archive to get to. How would you respond to that?
Within the draft SOC 8 document, it specifically names the fiction archive and refers to it, so they are aware of its existence. But in addition, certain academics involved with WPATH had been involved in this forum directly for decades. As well, WPATH has published research that was gathered from the opinions of these anonymous participants within this forum, again, writing stories that involve sexual abuse of children, getting their opinions through research, starting as early as 2009. One such paper was presented at a WPATH conference in Oslo, Norway. And then in 2010, the following year, the International Journal of Transgenderism, which is published by WPATH, then released that presentation in their publication.
I suppose the defence might be that these are private fantasies engaged in by adults. They're not actually breaking the law, they're just engaging in fantastical writing. What would you say to that?
I would say that within the forum, I have seen claims that were made that the research that was being gathered from this community was influential in editing diagnostic literature, specifically the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Disorders. Now, the claims within this forum are that these men, because they are primarily men, were outsourced for their opinions on medical terminology. So we initially in the DSM-4, the previous edition, we had the term gender identity disorder. This was changed in the DSM-5 to gender dysphoria, and then there's a section added about gender dysphoria in children. Now, if these claims are true, I would think that would be quite damning that anonymous participants of a fetish forum had a hand in changing medical terminology, specifically in regards to the medical transitioning of children.
So just to be absolutely clear, it is your contention that there are senior academics and clinicians who have a vested interest in the castration of children insofar as that they have a fetish relating to that subject, and that they are directly involved with the modification of policy at WPATH.
Yes, that appears to be the case, and I believe that I've seen substantial evidence that that is the case. As well, within that forum, videos were being uploaded as pornographic content that involved castration and even what are euphemistically called MTF surgeries, or the transsexual surgeries.
So this is very disturbing stuff. But I suppose WPATH might say, well, there might be some members who have these fetishes, but a lot of the people, a lot of the practitioners who are engaged in the transitional procedures with minors are not motivated by that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. I do think there are a lot of different motivations going on behind the scenes for various individuals. However, it's been my observation that within the medical protocols and sort of the leading figures pushing the transitioning of children, there is a strong overlap between paraphilias and fetishism from the research that I have done.
Now, you've been at the forefront of it, exposing a lot of these stories over the past few years at Redux magazine. Can I ask, when you exposed this particular point, that NHS Scotland itself had uploaded this draft version of the Standards of Care, which linked to this fetish site, they did, I must emphasise that NHS Scotland did apologise for that and subsequently distanced themselves from WPATH, although there was a leaked recording of a clinician at the Sandyford Sexual Health Clinic in Glasgow suggesting that, in fact, WPATH did still influence NHS policy. So why is it that, given the severity of these revelations, your story wasn't picked up more widely? It was only, as far as I can see, the Telegraph and the Mail that reported on NHS Scotland uploading this draft.
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons for that. The first being that the story is so grotesque that most people might not tend to believe it or dismiss it as the realm of a conspiracy theory, regardless of the evidence that we provided in our reports. I also think that there is a tendency to hope for the best in your medical professionals. You don't want to have this view that someone that you're trusting with your health or even the health of your child might be influenced by bad actors or even have a bad intention themselves.
So, Genevieve Gluck, there's a lot to explore here, and I think it would be fantastic to have you back on the show in some time so that we can explore this a little further. Thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for discussing this issue with me.